Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. So I recently bought myself the Miya himi jelly gouache, which you've probably seen on YouTube at some point, and I always thought they looked really fun to use and they're also super affordable, so I just wanted to try them out for myself. And I wanted to quickly show you the unboxing process and then also have a cozy painting session later in the video. So in case you want to skip this part, I included some timestamps in the comments below and also on the screen on the top. So I chose the smallest set available, which has 18 colors, just because I really like mixing the colors myself, and it's also a lot less effort to take care of the set, since you do sometimes have to kind of revitalize the colors if they dry out in between uses. And each of the colors comes in a little plastic cup like this, and then you just have to peel off the seal, which can be a little bit difficult because some of them are stuck on a lot more than others, and this process can also get a little bit messy, so just be prepared to get a bit of paint on your fingers. I didn't want to waste any of the paint on the lids, so I just used a spatula to scrape it off. And also with some of the colors there is a bit of separation, which is just the binder, and so I also ended up stirring them up a little bit to make sure the paint is nice and evenly mixed. The first three colors look almost identical on camera because they're really dark, but it's actually a black on the top left and then burnt umber underneath and a Prussian blue to the right. I also ended up putting in the colors in the wrong order, so I basically just mirrored them on accident. So later on I just switched them out again so that they matched the color card that is included in the set. Overall, I think there's a really nice selection of colors in this set, so there's always a warm and cool version of each of the primary colors, as well as some additional colors like the burnt umber and the Prussian blue, which are great for mixing darker shades. There are also two whites included in the set, which was another reason why I bought this one in particular, since I tend to use a lot of white and so it's just good to have a backup. And technically one of them is supposed to be titanium white, which is usually more opaque, but I haven't really noticed a big difference between them, so I just ended up using them interchangeably. Now do keep in mind that these paints are not professional quality, so they're great for just practicing and learning how to use gouache in general, which is what I will be using them for, but a lot of the pigments are most likely not light fast, which means that they can change color or just fade completely when they're exposed to sunlight, so that's just something to keep in mind. I have painted with gouache in the past, but it has been quite a while, and I'm just hoping that having the paints readily available and also not having to worry about squeezing out the right amount of paint so that I don't waste any of my expensive paints will motivate me to use gouache a lot more, since I do really enjoy it. So that was basically my main goal when I bought these paints. I'm also going to be swatching out all of the colors because they tend to look a lot different on paper than in the pen itself, and it just makes it a bit easier to pick the right colors, so I would definitely recommend making some swatches before you start painting, so that's what I'm going to be doing next. I also ended up swatching them with a bit of water just to see how opaque they are. Now let's get into the painting session, and for this one I will just occasionally explain my process, but for the most part I'll just let you enjoy the video. So for my supplies I'll be using some high quality watercolor paper because it's very durable, and also just because that's what I had on hand. And then I also got myself a few brushes and a little glass of water to rinse them out. Next, I used some washi tape to protect the edges of the paper, and the reference I will be using is a scene from Studio Ghibli's My Neighbor Totoro, which is one of my all-time favorite movies, and it features so many beautiful landscapes, which I thought would be really great to practice with. After making a rough sketch, I like to just go in and add a wash of color all over the page, just to have a sort of base to work with, and nothing has to be super specific or accurate at this stage. It's mostly just to cover up most of the white of the paper and roughly plan out the elements of the painting. I also mixed in a bit more water at this stage so that the colors are a bit lighter, and it just makes it easier to add more color on top later on. Next, I started painting the sky because I think it's always best to work from back to front, and I started by just defining some of the lighter areas in the sky and also just blending out the colors so that I have a nice even base to place the clouds on top of. With gouache in general, since it's a water-based medium, if you go over an area a lot, you will lift up some of the colors underneath, because even if the colors have dried, they will reactivate if they come into contact with water. So this can definitely be a big advantage in comparison to something like acrylic paints, but you do have to keep it in mind, and especially if the color has not fully dried, it will mix with whatever you put on top a lot more. So if you want to cover something up, I would make sure the color is completely dry underneath, and also to use as little water as possible. Of course, this also means it's pretty easy to blend colors together, for example like I did for these clouds, by just using a bit of water on a clean brush. You can also lighten up colors by adding just some thinned out white on top, which will look a little bit too light at first, but it actually dries down a lot less opaque. And I also use that same technique for the purple shades and the clouds on the top. Next up, I moved on to the background elements, which are mainly just these hills and trees in the distance, and I used several shades of green to first just kind of define the overall shape, and then slowly build up lights and shadows to make them look less flat and define their shapes. Another thing to keep in mind is that things at a distance tend to appear more bluish and overall less vibrant, which is also called atmospheric perspective, and it makes landscapes look a lot more realistic. So I ended up mixing in a lot more blue and also some white for the hills in the very back, and also for the grass, which ended up looking almost gray in comparison. For the grass in the foreground, I worked from back to front again so that I can layer the different shades of green on top of each other and just create more depth that way. So I first used a really light greenish yellow, and I used a very small round brush to make very thin strokes for the blades of the grass. And then I slowly built up the layers with darker green tones, which also ended up becoming more and more bluish towards the bottom of the painting because they're in the shade and the ones on the top are being lit up by the evening sun. I think Studio Ghibli always just managed to make their landscapes feel really natural and realistic, and so for the grass I also added these small plants here and there, just like in the reference, which helps to break up the sort of sameness of the grass itself. You don't have to actually paint any specific plants, but I just kind of let my brush do most of the work by making just some simple shapes that kind of look like leaves to create that sort of layered look. Lastly, I'm just adding some last details, which are mainly these orange flowers that add just the right amount of warmth and contrast to all of the green and blue tones of the painting. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I focused mainly on just the overall shapes and colors instead of trying to actually paint flowers. Now that the painting is all finished, all that's left to do is to peel off the tape, which is always super satisfying. I really hope you enjoyed this video and watching me paint this scene, so here are just some close-up shots. I really had a lot of fun trying out the himi gouache, and I will definitely be using it more in the future, so let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you again in my next video. Bye!